Well, good morning. What a joy and a pleasure it is to be joining you. I send blessings from Unity Church of the Triangle, where I am so fortunate to work with Rev Newsom Holmes and the most phenomenal staff, besides the staff here. They are so in favor of blessing me and sending me out. So I really see this as an extension of what's already happening there in Raleigh. So we are a part of one great big unity movement. And so this morning you may be thinking, well, how did she get here? I was speaking with my mentor. Her name's Reverend Eileen Gore, and I worked with her for 8 years outside of Washington, D.C. That's where I first found unity. I was sharing with her that I was coming here a few weeks ago, and she said, well, Jennifer, you know it's Chad O'Shea who's responsible for why we're all in unity. I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. She said, come on, don't you remember the very first Sunday when we opened the doors back in 1996 and Stan, the mountain man, came? I said, the man with the great big beard and the bald head? And she said, yes. I said, okay, but I don't think I know how that's connected. She said, well, Stan, the mountain man, is who introduced me and my husband, this is my mentor, Eileen speaking, when we lived outside of Lynchburg, Virginia. He walked into our house one day because he was our neighbor, and he said, I got somewhere y'all've got to go. And he took us to a Unity church. I said, yes, Eileen, I know that story. She said, well, I guess I never told you. The way he got to Unity was years before that. He met Chad O'Shea. So isn't that beautiful? How we're all connected. Oh. So I am having one of those complete circle moments. One of those, as I was so blessed this morning to be sharing with this lovely lady on the front row about how when we walk in unity, we feel home. So what is it that brings us to this desire to feel that home? What is it that's stirring within us that says, I'm sure there's more? I remember when I was 7 years old, and I grew up in the church. Neither of my parents were ministers, but all the generations before were in ministry. And I remember at 7 having this joy-filled moment of knowing that I was not alone, and that there was more than what I could see that was happening in front of me. Now, sometimes I hear in unity, and I resonate with this, that, well, perhaps I'm seeing more than what is really going on. Because, you know, we have that sense. Well, at 7, I had no idea. Yet I just could feel a oneness, is the word I call it now. So for me, I know at 7, I was kind of tweaked of, if I can have this experience in church. Then I found myself as a teenager having a similar experience, of all places, sitting on the riding lawnmower of my 4-acre front yard. And I'll tell you, I wasn't very happy. I was not very happy about being on that riding lawnmower. We'd moved to the country, just north of the North Carolina border. And my family was ecstatic that we lived in the country. Personally, I liked having neighbors. I liked having people to play with. Yet that day, on that riding lawnmower, I began to sense the power and the presence of something greater than myself. And it reached deep within me and asked me to go beyond that emotional experience of frustration, anger, and loneliness. And so at 19, I had another experience. I was blessed to be with my grandmother as she died, as she made her transition. And while at 19 that was a very confusing experience for me, there was again a sense that came. There's only one. There's only one. And see, that conflicted with a lot of what I had been taught. And so I realized that part of my journey was to bring that expanded 7-year-old, 12-year-old, and 19-year-old momentary feeling. I wanted to shorten that gap. I didn't want to wait 5 years or 7 years before I felt that again. And so it began my search. And part of my search was, yes, a heartfelt search for that feeling of oneness, but it was also an intellectual search. And at 26, I found unity. And in that finding unity, I was so fortunate because in the community that I found myself in was a teacher who said, "What do you really want to learn?" And I don't believe at that young 20 age I could articulate that I wanted to bring more of the peace, more of the experience of that oneness that I had found. And yet she tapped into it. And so this morning, one of the things I want to share with you that is so serendipitous to what Chad shared already, I was searching for a freedom from the inner struggle. I was searching for a way that my mind could serve that oneness I had felt in my heart. So I want to share with you this morning from one of my favorite authors. His name is David White. David White is a corporate poet, and he writes this, and it's called Loaves and Fishes. This is not the age of information. This is not the age of information. Forget the news, the radio, and the blurred screen. This is the time of loaves and fishes. People are hungry, and one good word is bread for 1,000. People are hungry, and one good word is food for 1,000. I believe many of us are searching for that one good word, for that one aha moment. To quote Oprah Winfrey, who celebrated her last show this week. If you happen to catch her last show of the 25 years, I found it very interesting that it appeared to be her sermon or her truth talk, where she shared those pieces that were of most value for herself about her journey. And one of those things, and I don't know if she coined it, but I believe that it has become a more mainstream concept, was the aha moment. Looking for that sense of that oneness. One of the phrases I like is a landing, really knowing when I'm at a point in my life where the circumstances and situations are absolutely calling for me to make a decision, where perhaps I am faced with the experience of great change. Anybody in here in great change? Having an opportunity to reevaluate a choice that we've made before, or perhaps a new opportunity springing forth? Yes. My experience and my observation is that as the last few years have rapidly begun to increase in my experience of time, change is all around. And that gap between change to change gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And so I'm sensing that the need to create shorter gaps between that awareness and feeling tone of one presence, that feeling of knowing we're right on track, that feeling of being on purpose, that desire for that gap gets shorter. And so that we're living in a greater awareness. So what are some of the ways that we look for those inspirations, those decisions? How do we know which way to go? Well, I really like to read how-to books. Anybody like to read how-to books? Yes, this is a unity community, of course. I also really like to hear from the experts. I like to call around. I like to know what the gurus are saying. I like to read what the wise folk in the community are sensing, are happening. I also like to look for signs. Anybody like to look for signs? I'll tell my husband, I'm looking for my burning bush. He'll roll his eyes. That's okay. His time to see signs, I'm sure, is coming. One of my experiences was when I was in a time of great, great change. I was 9 months pregnant with our 10-year-old. And I was in absolute denial that it was Friday morning in Washington, D.C. at 8 o'clock, and it was time to go to the hospital. Now, if any of you have ever lived in a big city, 8 o'clock on a Friday morning, who wants to try and get somewhere in a hurry? I was convinced we needed to drive on the Beltway in the shoulder, where all that gravel is. He would have none of that. And I'd been up for almost 24 hours, so it didn't really matter what I wanted. I just needed to get in the car and know we were on our way. So because it was that time of day, we ended up going through the suburb streets, if you will. And we go by the one church that I had gone to before I found Unity. It just happened to be 4 blocks from the hospital where my daughter was going to be born. And I remember riding in this car, and I, for a moment, opened my eyes, and I saw a marquee. And the marquee said, "Sometimes joy needs pain to give it birth." Now, here's the thing that you may or may not know. I'd already announced to the world that my daughter's name was Joy. I had known that I was going to have a girl, even though the test couldn't show it, even though my husband said, "Well, you don't really know." I kept saying, "It's going to be a girl. We're going to name her Joy." So imagine when I see that, I think I am delusional. This is what they mean when they say transition. I'm checking out. Well, several hours later, after she'd been born and I was in the hospital, and this man came to visit from the church, from the Unity Church. And he said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "You know what you can do for me." Because I knew he was a photographer. I said, "Do you have one of those little flip cameras in your car?" "Well, of course, Jennifer. Can you go by this church down the street and take a picture of that sign? Because nobody believes me when I tell them that I saw that sign." He kind of smiled and giggled. I thought, he doesn't believe either. You know what? That is exactly what that sign said. Sometimes joy needs pain to give it birth. So we like our signs. We look for our signs. And yet, at the core of who we really are, there is a power and a presence that is accessible through our faculty or our ability of wisdom. That within us is our own God power source, our own GPS. And so one of the things I know that's been profound for me is to find a way that works with my analytical mind that's in alignment with that heart center, to access that wisdom. I call wisdom the marriage of knowledge, that information that we all like to know, where we collect our data, we do our research, because I like to do that too. And then there is that judgment part that brings in the information that we know and asks the information to serve our internal innate wisdom. And you know, it's becoming more and more mainstream to look towards that place of wisdom. One of the people I was so blessed to meet when I lived in Kansas City going to seminary was Barnett Hellsberg of Hellsberg Diamonds. Perhaps you've seen the commercials. Hellsberg Diamonds is a company that his father had founded, and then he sold it to Warren Buffett. And so he writes in his book, What I Learned Before I Sold to Warren Buffett. He writes about the power of this internal innate wisdom and following our gut. So remember, this is pure business world. He says, "You might look for a quiet place where you can avoid distracting noise so you can really feel your gut. Or do like my dad did, prime your mind with data and then let your unconscious work while you sleep." That's kind of like Charles Fillmore, our co-founder. He says, trusting your gut isn't meant to replace using your conscious brain. The two work together. Your inner voice can validate solutions your more analytical, conscious mind suggests. And it energizes the decisions, even making them truly inspired. So what if we can be like a tribe that's walking through the forest. A tribe that several years prior found a stream in the middle of the forest and did not know which side to claim. A tribe which years before took vines, beautiful ornate vines, and tied them together to create a rope, and had a tug of war to decide which side of the stream they were going to walk on. Of course, with tug of war, there's a winner and there's a loser. This tribe learned that perhaps this time when they found a stream and were looking for a new direction, they learned that they were different. And that perhaps, instead of a tug of war, there could be another way. They took those same vines that were beautiful and ornate and diverse, and each person chose vine clippings that reflected their own character, their own spiritual gifts. And they created pom-poms. They clipped those vines together, and in the pom-poms, they began to walk the edges of the stream to look for which path was theirs to take. And as they walked those edges of the stream, they began to sway, to assert themselves and to give way to another, to twirl around. And they found themselves in a movement that began to look like a dance. And in this dance, there was this moment where there was an energy and they came together and stopped in silence. And in that silence, there was a path that was breaking off that no one had even noticed before. There was a collective energy that said, this is our way to go. What if we too, because we have this innate wisdom, tap into that? We pay attention as our wording, as we go from Sunday to Sunday, when our wording begins to be, I think. I think. When I hear myself say I think, I realize, ooh, my brain is right now in charge. And we simply take some deep breaths. And we center into our heart. And we know that our thinking serves our inner guidance. What if, as we're making a decision, we declare an intention to create a win-win for everyone involved? No winners and losers. No tug of war. A solution that works for everyone. What if we are creating, moment to moment, that heart-centered connection that invites us to know that there's only one presence and one power. If we get inner guidance that says, yes, we celebrate. And if we get inner guidance that says no, we simply pause and choose to move slow. And to know that there's no external circumstance or outer circumstance that says, this is what must happen. I believe that that's true. I believe that there's that inner wisdom within each of us. And it's like a muscle waiting to be exercised so we can build that and bring those gaps between those moments of knowing oneness shorter and shorter. Namaste.